Hi everyone. So today I am going to make a very long overdue review of this book, The Bitcoin Standard by Saifuddin Ammous, or rather Dr. Saifuddin Ammous. And this book first came out in 2018, but I'm embarrassed to say that I did not read it back then, surely out of my own cognitive bias. And this is one of those cases where um, don't judge the book by its cover, but don't judge the book by what you think what you think the author might be like based on his credentials. He's a young engineer, and I thought, whatever, this is going to be a book about ones and zeros and code, and no. So that's how I felt. And that's why, even though this book was on my list to read, I did not bother reading it until I listened to an interview that Dr. Jordan Peterson did with the author. And I think the interview was done in September, but it was released in the week of Thanksgiving break. And I listened to that interview. It's called The Immaculate Conception, Bitcoin Standard versus the Fiat Standard, or something to that effect, on Dr. Jordan Peterson's channel. And I listened to that interview, and it was truly one of those conversation on the way kind of conversations where Dr. Jordan Peterson, who's a clinical psychologist, and this guy who is a trained engineer and then who started his doctoral in sustainable development, got interested in Austrian economics because of how true and truthful and integral Austrian economics is relative to like the BS pseudo economics that we're taught these days, and the kind of magic that people are taught to do in these kind of sustainable development kind of things in that field. And he began to kind of understand more about economics in course of his doctoral in sustainable development, and I felt like this author, Saifuddin Ammous, he had a very strong core of truth, and that's really what made me want to then check out his book. Now, interestingly, I found his book. It's read out for free on YouTube. And but it's on like super fast speed on YouTube, which is fine. But his way of his words are just so beautiful in what he says. I'll read out some snippets. His style of writing is so beautiful that I wanted to change it to 0.5 or 0.75 speed to just take it all in, because his style of writing is almost poetic. And that's why, even though I listen to the book, and I do comprehend better when I listen to books relative to reading them, but this book, I actually bought it and I read this one too, because it's just brilliant. Okay, so I am, so with that, where do I even begin? Because, okay, where do I begin? Well, I'll begin where it began for me, with this, which was with the interview that Dr. Jordan Peterson did. And, well, then I'll go back and forth between his actual book and what I got from the interview. And essentially, I really appreciate the fact that this author has gone about describing, it's very much like a history book, and it's very much a book more about the gold standard, I would say, than about the Bitcoin standard, which is interesting because yeah, sure, I've listened to audio courses on the technicalities behind Bitcoin and the mining and the process and all of that technical stuff. But this book is far more than that. I would say, first of all, nearly so the first one third of the book goes into the history of money, and it goes into the sort of how it started off with with stones, and then when people came with different kind of stones, then the people who I'm going way off track and into the weeds, so I'll back up a bit. Back in the day, in a certain place, there were these stones that people had staking, like, okay, this is mine and that's yours, and there was a ledger. And in that sense, it was this sort of like distributed ledger, right? But then people showed up with these different stones, and then people got kind of confused about that concept of money. Through that bit of history, he very subtly, what is that word? Foreshadowing, I think, where you talk about something that an idea you're going to introduce in the future, and you're going to you bring it in ahead of time. He kind of foreshadows that way the stock to flow concept, because he talks about the stock. He gives these really cool origins of words, because I really love understanding where words come from, and the word pecuniary comes from cattle. The word salary and sal comes from salt, which was the currency in which people were paid. I thought those kind of things were really cool. It was a delightful read of the Roman evolution of coinage, and something that I personally really enjoy learning about and reading about anyways. At this point, I'll go into something that a conversation that came up during the Immaculate Conception interview between Saifuddin and Dr. Peterson. Actually, I should really say Dr. Ammous and Dr. Peterson. I don't know why I have the hubris to refer to him by his first name, perhaps because he's so young. He's a very young guy, actually. Anyway, so and the conversation that came up between them was about the Byzantine generals problem, and why does Bitcoin solve this Byzantine generals problem. And he didn't go into this much in the book, when he went into sort of that Roman Empire history, but I'll mention it here. So basically, think about Byzantine as East Rome. So Rome, the Roman Empire, kind of they were they began to debase their currency by clipping the coins, and then they began to, because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? And so they began clipping their coins and debasing their currency, and ultimately the soldiers were like, screw this, why should I fight for this bullshit money, this worthless currency that's like losing its value. And that's how kind of that, and coupled with a pandemic, what a confluence, right? It managed to let the Spartans get the upper hand, and that's how kind of the Roman Empire sort of fell. But they kind of did their own little split into the Byzantine Empire, and the Byzantine Empire managed to keep their currency stable. And he describes this quite a bit. He goes into like how Constantine was committed to the solidus and keeping that the fixed rate, and then how that word became the bezant. And by the way, that's the origins of the word embezzle come from there. It's a phenomenon where, and I didn't learn this from his book, but I think it's interesting to mention at this point. Embezzle is a situation where you think you have something, and then somebody else also thinks they have the same thing, but you can't quite tell, and that's actually exactly what's happening on the COMEX right now, right? With all this hypothecation and rehypothecation, where if you say you buy GLD or SLV or some sort of metal derivative, and you think that you are entitled to this piece of metal, but actually there are 100 times the claims on that particular metal that's held in the vault somewhere where you trust that it may be held. And that's literally the definition of embezzle. And that so he goes into sort of the peasant, and then the move to the dinar, and how this kept they kind of kept that value, and that bit of currency has sort of still remained. And I'm happy to say that I have some of these coins, and he mentioned this too, where I may kind of quote him. I wrote this down. This is before I actually bought the book and marked things off in the book too. He said how he spoke about how everywhere there has been a sound money currency, or a sound monetary system, the culture and innovations and inventions have really flourished. And he spoke about the florin and the ducat, and I may be getting the pronunciation wrong. Ducat, I think it's called the ducat, whatever. And how every culture and civilization really that has maintained its civility has always been on the basis of a sound monetary system, and where the money has really been pure and true, and where people get paid for the work that they do, and they get paid in proper money. And not only do they get paid in proper sound currency, but a person is able to store that energy. And this is kind of where it's like going into that Bitcoin realm, where Bitcoin really is stored energy, where when a person is allowed to store their energy for the future, that's where you can really preserve that thermodynamic property of the thermodynamic what is it, it's a law of thermodynamics, that the conservation of energy, as opposed to the fiat money system that completely destroys that and introduces what we call this cantillion effect, which is where like people who are closest to that stream of money, closest to that like champagne glass on the top, get it first, and then the rest get the dribbles. That's sort of where when in 2020 2 or 3 trillion, or however much, was pumped out into the economy. And if you do the math, even if every single American in the United States received a check for $2,000, which they didn't, but even if they did, and what is the population? Is it 300 million? Let's round it up to 400 million and say 400 million multiplied by whatever. And no, 3, 4. I don't know, but I did the math somewhere in Excel, and I figured out that it would be 300 and something billion dollars if every head in America, children even, got $2,000. But then 3 to 400 billion, but they pushed out 2 trillion. So what happened to the 1.6 trillion in there, right? So it's like that kind of thing. What happened to it? Yeah, you can see what happened to it in the top 500 of the stock market. That's what happened to it. Share buybacks. Anyways, I'm veering off topic on this. His book goes into, I love the way he's critiqued Keynes. I will read some of the his sections out here because they're just beautiful. I've even read out some sections to my children because it's just amazing. He goes into how academia was hijacked, and that I think was absolutely brilliant. How this writing research papers is like a bloody Ponzi scheme of garbage that you get peer reviewed by other people and not real people who live in the real world and who will actually tell you that your theory is garbage. And I think he was able to point that out because as an engineer, he has to build shit that works in the real world. Because if he builds stuff that falls apart, or like, say you build an airplane that just goes poof in the sky, then yeah, you failed engineer. But in these social sciences, like economics, your mistakes and your garbage thinking is only revealed like 2 generations later, after you made all your money on writing books and whatever, and selling your dumb theories to students and corrupting the next generation, until someone dares to be a contrarian and says, no, hold on, I think you've made a huge mistake here. So I think he calls all of that out very beautifully in his book, and his style of writing is also very poetic, and so I really like that. And he wrote something criticizing Keynes, and it was so I just thought it was so beautifully direct. He said Keynes was a failed investor and a statistician, and I was like, yep, he was. Anyways, I'm going to at this point read some of the beautiful things from his book. Oh, another great thing he wrote in his book was about how the gold standard was in effect abandoned before the First World War. And on this point, I must say that I think Saifuddin Ammous should read this book about how the First World War started, or I think if he goes to corbettreport.com and looks up like the conspiracy of the First World War, he'll see there's a really great documentary that outlines everything, and in that the name of the book is there because I've forgotten the name of the book, but it really talks about how how actually the Federal Reserve, the creation of the Federal Reserve and the IRS is sort of what led to this kind of move away from sound money, encouraging war. In some ways, even you'll understand why and how the U.S. really took away that. Well, not took away. Maybe that's just the natural evolution of things. How it went from the Dutch to the British to the Americans to DVD. And that move from moving the British off the silver standard and gold standard and the silver standard, how all of that kind of made it so much worse for the First World War. And but what he really goes into, and I like the way he's like gone into a very data-driven approach about how money has lost its value in very and by countries. So it's not fluff. This guy is not at all about fluff, while still writing in a very poetic way. I'm going to read some bits here. Had European nations remained in the gold standard, or had the people of Europe held their own gold in their own hands, forcing government to resort to taxation instead of inflation, history might have been different. Skipping ahead a bit, but with the suspension of the gold standard, running out of financing was not enough to end the war. A sovereign was not enough to end the war. A sovereign had to run out of its people's accumulated wealth, expropriated through inflation. And then he also speaks about how these boys, because they were really young boys fighting the war. And as a mother of 2 young boys, I hate the idea of war. No, I don't like. I might become a traitor if we went to war. Yeah, because I say that on the cloud. No, I would not want my boys to go fight for a dumb, fucking, senseless war where Wall Street gets rich on the blood of my children. Hell no. Get angry thinking about it. Okay, let's self-regulate. I read this part out to my boys because I thought it was, the German and the English soldiers, they loved football. And he says this, most soldiers had a fondness for football, so many impromptu games were organized between the teams. The astounding fact exposed by this truce is that these soldiers had nothing against each other, had nothing to gain from fighting this war, and could see no reason to continue it. A far better outlet for the nation's rivalry would be in football, a universally popular game where tribal and national affiliations can be played out peacefully. Yes. He talks about how the average currency value in November 1918 dropped to 51% and 31%. He spoke about how these geographical changes in Europe were not significant to the winners, the Allied forces. But if you read that other book that I am mentioning is mentioned in more detail on the corbettreport.com, you'll see that actually the winners of this were that Pierpont Morgan guy, because of the way he has structured the loans from America to Britain and back and forth, and all, they were really the beneficiaries, not even the American people, frankly. It was the one bank intermediating the whole thing, which was fascinating in its own dark way. Then he talks about how after so officially the gold standard, we were not off the gold standard post World War One, but because the value of the gold was not reset to be what it should have rightly been. And in Jim Rickards in his books, and I've read at this point all of his books, so I don't know in which book specifically he talks about this, whether it's Road to Ruin or Aftermath or The New Case for Gold. But in one of his books, he talks about how the reason the gold standard failed. Oh yeah, it's in the book A New Case for Gold, in the very first chapter, where he dispels all the reasons why people critique the gold standard. And he says the gold standard doesn't work because you have to set it at a high enough price. But the problem is, when you set it at that super high price, you'll have riots on the street, and people will be pissed because the few that have managed to keep some gold will become millionaires. All the speculators in stock market will be crushed, and you'll have mayhem in that sense. But but I don't know the fixes to all of these things. But he says that a return to the old rates would cause citizens to demand holding gold rather than the ubiquitous paper receipts, and lead to the flight of gold outside the country to where it was fairly valued. And a fair market valuation would of the existing stock of currency to their stock of gold would be would be a hugely unpopular admission of the depreciation that the currency underwent. And this dilemma took money away from the market, where things are fairly priced, and turned it into a politically controlled economic decision. And he went into sort of how this then transformed to government money, and how that's a complete a mess. How then the Keynesian fallacy, in a way, is a bloody mess, to then And I hope I can find that beautiful excerpt where he said something about I can't find it, but he said something to the effect that people who had this common sense, and he didn't say it as crassly as I'm saying it. He said it beautifully. He said that people with this sort of like common sense of how things or what was correct, they were either killed or driven out of places like Russia and Germany, but they were only academically tortured in the United States. And yes, I have worked in academia, and no, like I can't even go there. It's yeah, but he talks about sort of how this whole business of government money has really bastardized the academic system, and has also bastardized the academic and intellectual sovereignty. Because if you want to get funded, or at least, in economics, God help us, which is why, even though I have my bachelor's in economics and my MBA in finance, I would not think about getting a PhD in economics. Unless, let's see, I don't know, I might think about some brilliant idea. But I'm getting my doctoral in clinical psychology, which I have to say, even that field is sort of getting bastardized by some things that are just not accurate. And again, over there, I see it. I see the dilemma. You write something that's unpopular, and you have to cite and quote and do like 10 times the work as your peers who'll just go with the flow and say some bullshit that is okay, that fits the present narrative. And I got to kind of live this out the hard way in like one of my terms, semesters. Yeah, in one of my semesters this year, where and I won't mention the name of the professor or anything, but I critiqued something that I was supposed to watch on YouTube and talk about or write about, and I critiqued it because it was the standards of care and all of that. That was such garbage that I was like, no, this is as a healthcare provider, is this the motive we are going for? Is this how we are? Is this what we really want to do? And I cited a bunch of contrarian literature, and I cited all my sources, but she nicked me for 50% of the citation points, not 50% of the whole paper's points, 50% of the citation points, for that reason. And now, okay, because we were graded for 4 out of 5 papers, I said, okay, I want to make sure I get a really good one I want to get a perfect score and everything else, so because I don't want to drop from an A. I know that in the doctoral nobody gives a shit about whether you have an A or whatever, but I have standards for myself. And I asked this professor, and she was like, you'll make your life a lot easier if you just stick with what is just thought and just go with that narrative. And I just thought to myself, oh my God. And I told her, I said this to her one-on-one. I said, I could make this a lot easier on myself and go back to being like a program manager at some tech company, or go back to working in finance and make it real easy on myself. My goal in life is not to try to make it easier on myself, but to live a life and do the type of job that I can say that I lived with some level of integrity. So yeah, thanks for the suggestion on trying to make it easier on myself, but my trip really is trying to have integrity. So if you can help me with that and tell me how I can cite the multiple sources that I will cite in a proper way so I don't get docked 50% of the points, I would appreciate that. It was not a very fun conversation, I'll tell you that much. But anyways, back to this guy's book, because his book is truly, truly beautiful. Okay, here's what I want to say about, because, okay, it is theoretically possible to create an artificially scarce asset to endow it with a monetary role. Governments around the world did this after abandoning the gold standard, as did Bitcoin's creator. And, on that, I would say is where my critique lies. Because, my critique on Bitcoin has nothing to do with my critique of his book, because he has laid out these things actually. He has a whole section here on all the things that can be messed with in Bitcoin. And I think, how to kill Bitcoin, a beginner's guide. This section, and I think all these sociopaths who are trying to regulate Bitcoin, make it into a derivative asset, God help us. Talk about taking counterparty risk and magnifying it. That's exactly what they've done with making derivatives of Bitcoin. Talk about taking something that's pure and good and bastardizing it. That's, yeah. But he, I think in writing this down, how to kill Bitcoin, a beginner's guide. Okay, hacking, yeah, sure. Okay, you keep it on an exchange, you lose it. That's like keeping your stash of gold in an unlocked car and like going off, in a shitty neighborhood. That's so yeah, no. So the hack thing, that was not even the 51% attack. I think this section, I think certain whales could certainly do that, especially like these days. Because just think about it, right? You print a ton of money, buy a ton of Bitcoin, have the 51%, and then, yeah. So, but I think the really, really good things that he's pointed out, which were, these have been my own kind of hesitations that I have had with investing in Bitcoin. And he's laid these out. For example, like internet and infrastructure attacks, and the whole, cyber polygon exercise that the World Economic Forum did a practice drill on July the 9th, 2021. You can check it out, actually. The whole recording is on YouTube, 5 hours long. But you'll see how much of a real risk that is, actually. This, okay, and one thing, this kind of critique of mine is more a Ray Dalio thing, where he says, if the governments can't kill it, they will regulate it and tax it to the hilt. And I think that move is kind of happening already, because if you hear any of these people talk about it, if you hear Jerome Powell talk about it, or that Christine Lagarde, or anybody talk about it, they don't call it cryptocurrency, they call it a crypto asset. Why do they call it a crypto asset? Because you can't tax a currency, right? If I earned $5 and there was a deflation, and now my $5 is worth $10, or something's on sale. Or, okay, let me give you a very dumb example, okay? Say I go to Nordstrom's and I buy something, and it's a 20% sale. I don't have to pay tax on my 20% capital gains for my dollars being worth more in that store. That's currency, right? But if now your asset, if you call something an asset and that went up 20% and you used it, then when liquidating it and changing it to dollars or whatever, you have to pay that capital gain. So I think calling it a crypto asset now instead of cryptocurrency is that move, that very sneaky move of governments trying to get their pound of flesh through taxation. Another thing, this one that he mentions, is the rise in cost of nodes and the drop in the number of nodes. I think that whole bit of it, that I think that speaks a lot to the stable coin business, and and the kind of counterparty risk a the stable coins takes on, because it functions so much more like a money market, and how it's backed or not backed. Yeah, and this the sort of exchanges that have taken over, because that really kind of monopolizes that and makes it very central in those ways, which is something that I don't think, the guy who created Bitcoin, that's not what his trip was, clearly. So I love the way he has captured all of those critiques, let's say, criticisms rather, or not criticisms, because he's very pro Bitcoin, that's clear, but the ways in which things can be messed with, he has captured that beautifully here. What else have I written in my notes that I may have forgotten? Yes. I've written page 210 is ironic, and page 212 is a metaphor about Constantine. What have I written? Let me see this. Page 206, what is Bitcoin good for, the new emerging reserve currency? Sometimes I write these things because I in the moment I go on a mad scientist type of mode. Oh yeah, okay, this part. This is why I write down page numbers, because if the modern world is ancient Rome, suffering the economic consequences of monetary collapse with the dollar aureus, then Satoshi Nakamoto is our Constantine, Bitcoin is its Solidus, and the internet is our Constantinople. Bitcoin serves as a monetary lifeboat for people forced to transact and save in monetary media, constantly debased by governments. Yeah, I thought that was a really beautiful metaphor, where he said that Nakamoto is our Constantine. Though I don't know if this Nakamoto person is actually some kind of counterintelligence, let's just say. Intelligence for the government, then God help us all. Yeah, and what else did I say here? Bitcoin-backed, sorry, too many B's in this sentence. Bitcoin-backed banks will solve these problems. They can work like banks did before the nationalization of currency. That I thought was, that's why I wrote page 210 is ironic, because they can work like banks did before the nationalization of currency. But see, that was precisely what they did when nationalizing currency. They screwed things up with the floating exchange rate. And he describes this too in his book, where he says something about this floating exchange rate business. And if you want to know more about that, watch my video that's called Increase Your Financial Vocabulary to Increase Your financial understanding. But he talks about how the floating exchange rate is like trying to build a house with an elastic measuring tape. Now, the way I've always described this to my children is like this floating exchange rate business versus the gold the gold standard, fixed exchange rate standard, is like, okay, children, sunrise is, so say like take a classroom of like 40 children, and you say, okay, kids, sunrise time is wake up time, period. That's like the gold standard, or like the fixed exchange rate standard. It's like what time the sun rises, that's your wake up time, period, end of story. And then the 7 or the 20, yes, there's a reason why I chose 7 or the 20. 7 of the biggest bullies in the class say, no, ma'am, we have wake up time when the 7 of us wake up. And that's what these remaining 23, 40 minus 7, 33 kids have to abide by. And then some of these 7 get up at 9, some get up at 11, some get up at 6, the Germans maybe get up at a proper time. But some are undisciplined, get up whenever, and then you have to come up with this conglomeration of take all their wake-up times, make the average, and calculate the daily sunrise time based on when these 7 bullies in the class woke up. That is your floating exchange. And when I described it this way to my children, they were like, how would you know when to set your alarm clock by? How would you have any kind of, like, all the other children, so all the other countries in the world are like shit out of luck, right? Because it's like, we have to live on the mercy of these few big countries, doing the right thing, which, it's not good for anyone. Actually, it's not good for the smaller, not smaller countries, but the less powerful countries, and it's not good for these superpowers either, because there was a really good quote I heard once. It's better to be like a disciplined or like a eating less and disciplined human than to be like a wallowing pig that gets everything but they're living the life of a pig. Like, it's better to like have that kind of moderate yet integral existence. So it's absolutely brilliant, this book. There's one thing I will critique in this book, and that is, this is not so much as a critique as perhaps further research that Saifuddin Ammous can do. It is, I'm trying to find it in the book, cannot find it in the book, I wrote it down. He said something about silver that was not entirely accurate based on my research. Or maybe he didn't just pay that much attention to silver. But I have been reading about silver. So I will mention it. Darn it, where in my notes here can I find it? I lost my page. Here. Yes. So he said something about China abandoned the silver standard in 1935, and he didn't speak very positively about the Hunt brothers and their silver excursion, and he spoke about sort of silver's declining role in the monetary media. His logic was that sort of this banking and the ability to divide, he spoke about silver's purpose, or at least the way I understood it, he thought of silver as more like a small change for gold, and then with the ability of like dividing up gold through banking and through papers and through through paper money or digital money, etc., and making it very infinitesimally divisible. That kind of so there was not that much need of the silver standard or silver as a monetary metal. However, he has not really, and so in that sense, he said, China abandoned the silver standard in 1935, and then, this happened, and silver declined here and there. However, if he wants to know more, or if you want to know more about silver, and specifically about why China abandoned the silver standard in 1935, check out this book called The Story of Silver by William Silber, I think is his name, Silber. The Story of Silver. And it's on Audible. And I've not reviewed the book, but I think I should. I actually will, because I've listened to his book like 2-3 times now. And in that book, The Story of Silver, he doesn't get mired by like the political spin of things. He just states like what happened to silver. It's like almost like an autobiography of silver. And he really, like, it's a very objective view in a sense, because he it's not like he swings from supporting left-wing people to right-wing people to left-wing people. It's not like that. This author is simply stating it like a story of silver, which is what he calls it too, the story of silver. In that book, why did China abandon silver, right? So there is a chapter, chapter 5 and chapter 7. I think one is called When China and America Collide, and another one, this is not new, this is like when China and America collided in like the 1930s over this, and another one, some explosion in Shanghai, is the other chapter. Those 2 chapters, it talks about the drama of how in June 28th 1934, there was a memo that FDR, the same, I'll say the word, asshole, who confiscated all the gold from the American people, the same guy, he wrote up this memo that allowed this other guy, Key Pittman and Morgenthau, I think Morgenthau was the one actually, he authorized Morgenthau to do some sort of trading on the futures, do some sort of trading in silver, which really jacked up the price quite a bit, and that made China's currency not competitive for its exports. Then this guy, I don't know if it was Key Pittman or Morgenthau himself, but they did this diplomatic dance with these 2 other guys from China in those days, in 1934-ish, wherein then the Chinese had really they had no other option but to give up their silver standard. So it wasn't exactly like China abandoned its silver standard. It was more like the Americans manipulated the Chinese into having no choice but to abandon their silver standard. So that bit, I want to just add that. However, I must say, as an author, when you're writing such an incredible book that that goes into, this guy has educated me on stuff like from Roman era up to like now, and on the future and all of the potential hacks and flaws and etc. of Bitcoin. So if the guy missed out 1 year of history, I'm not going to hold it against him. Yeah, it's a great book. I highly recommend you read it. Yeah, here it is. That's the book. Okay. And if you've been listening all this time, thank you for listening, and have an awesome day. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think about this book review, rant, opinion, whatever. And thanks again for your time. Take care. Bye. Oh, if you want me to review any particular book, or if you want me to read a particular book, let me know, because I'm always looking for cool new books to read, and to, cool new books that I can express my opinion on. So if you know of some fantastic book that you want me to read and review, let me know. Thanks again. Bye.